She thought calling the cops on me would be her ultimate victory. After all, she was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, barking rules, handing out fines, and trying to scare anyone who didn't bow to her control. But when those flashing lights pulled in my driveway, she had no idea the truth was about to turn her world upside down. Because this wasn't just about a cabin, it was about who really owned the land beneath her feet. And when the truth came out, the shock was bigger than anything she could have imagined. So, what happens when power meets reality? When I first found the cabin, it felt like stepping into another world. Nestled deep in a quiet valley, the air was cleaner, the nights were darker, and every sound was amplified. The crackle of a campfire, the whisper of wind through pine branches, even the distant rush of the river that curved its way through the land. It wasn't just a property, it was freedom. After years of grinding city life, deadlines, and endless noise, this cabin became my retreat. A place where I could wake up to sunlight cutting through the trees, drink coffee on the porch, and feel like I'd finally found peace. Most people dream of that kind of life, but never reach it. I had, and for the first few weeks, it was perfect. I fixed up the place, stacked firewood, cleared trails, and introduced myself to a few of the neighbors. Families, retirees, even a couple of weekend adventurers. The community seemed friendly enough, the kind of people who waved when you passed, and occasionally dropped by with pies or extra vegetables from their gardens. Everyone seemed happy to share this little valley escape. But then, I started noticing something. For a place that looked so wild and free, there were rules everywhere. Small, neatly printed notices at the edge of roads. A binder of community guidelines slipped into my mailbox, and whispers from neighbors about someone named Karen, the unofficial enforcer of the HOA. At first, I brushed it off. Rules exist everywhere, and I wasn't the type to stir up trouble. I kept the place clean, stayed quiet, and tried to blend in. But I couldn't ignore the way Karen seemed to watch me. She wasn't subtle about it either. I'd catch her slowing her SUV whenever she passed my property, staring at the cabin as if she was waiting to find something wrong. And the neighbors, though polite, always dropped her name in hushed tones, as if everyone knew she had more power than she should. The first warning came faster than I expected. A crisp, official-looking letter folded neatly into my mailbox. It said my firewood, the same carefully stacked logs that I had cut and prepared for winter, didn't comply with community standards. It needed to be moved or covered, or I would face a fine. A fine for firewood in a valley surrounded by forests. I laughed it off at first, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. But when I asked a neighbor about it, they only sighed and told me not to take it lightly. Karen doesn't let things go, they said, shaking their head. If she started with you, she won't stop. I wanted to believe they were exaggerating, that this was just a harmless neighbor with too much time on her hands. But the look in their eyes said otherwise. And soon, I started noticing the pattern. Every small detail of my cabin, every improvement I made, seemed to catch her attention. My porch chairs weren't community approved. My gravel driveway didn't meet the aesthetic guidelines. Even the shade of paint on my window frames, the one I'd chosen to match the trees, wasn't compliant. The firewood fine was just the opening move. The next month, another letter arrived. This time, it claimed my gravel driveway disrupted the natural aesthetic of the community. I had 2 weeks to either replace it with an HOA-approved surface or face escalating penalties. It was absurd. My driveway wasn't new. It had been there long before I moved in. But logic didn't matter to Karen. These weren't rules designed to protect the valley. They were weapons, and I was her chosen target. The absurdity would have been laughable if it wasn't so exhausting. Every letter came with a threat of fines, and every fine came with the implication that she could escalate further. And the worst part? She thrived on it. I could almost see her smug smile as she sealed each envelope, convinced that she was slowly breaking me down. But I wasn't the only one. One evening, a neighbor stopped by, continues narration of neighbors, intimidation, and finally the secret land ownership preparation. Late one evening, headlights swept across my porch. Tires crunched on gravel. When I looked outside, I saw her SUV and a patrol car, lights flashing. She had finally called the cops. The night it all came to a head was colder than most. A sharp wind rattled the trees, sending loose pine needles scattering across my porch. I had been inside the cabin, finishing dinner, when I saw the headlights sweep across the window. At first, I thought it was just another car passing through the valley, but when I heard the crunch of tires stopping at the end of my driveway, I knew it was different. Two vehicles, one SUV, the other a patrol car with its lights flashing. I stepped outside, and there she was, Karen, arms crossed, jaw tight, standing beside the police officer she had clearly summoned. She looked triumphant, like this was the moment she had been waiting for all along. "There he is," she announced, pointing at me like she'd caught a criminal red-handed. "This man has been violating community standards for months. He's refused every notice, ignored every fine. And now, officer, I demand you remove him from this property. He doesn't belong here." Her words hit like ice, but what struck me harder was the certainty in her tone. Continues confrontation with officer, handing over folder of deeds. I handed it to the officer without saying a word. He flipped it open, his brow furrowing as he scanned the pages. Property deeds, boundary maps, title records, everything signed and notarized, proving one undeniable fact. Not only did I own the cabin, I owned the land beneath every single house in that valley. Karen's smug expression faltered the second she caught sight of the documents. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. "This checks out," the officer said slowly. Continues dramatic reveal, Karen panicking, neighbors watching, the final declaration of ownership. When the flashing lights faded and the last car pulled away from the valley, the silence that followed felt heavier than ever. For months, Karen's presence had been a shadow cast across my cabin, across the entire community. She had ruled with letters and fines, intimidation and whispers. But now, after that confrontation, something had shifted. The spell was broken, and though the night had ended, the true impact of what happened was only beginning to unfold. The very next morning, I noticed the difference. Neighbors approach, relief spreading, Karen trying to fight back but isolated. Then came the meetings. Karen called for an emergency session of the HOA board, demanding immediate action against me. But something incredible happened. No one showed up. The neighbors who had once nodded along to her orders simply stopped participating. Without her audience, without the people to enforce her rules, Karen was powerless. And the more she pushed, the more isolated she became. Still, I didn't want revenge. That might sound strange, but standing there that night, watching her unravel, I realized something. People like Karen thrive on attention. Taking her down wasn't about humiliating her. It was about giving everyone else the freedom to live without fear. Continues with a letter of respect and neighbors uniting at Fire Pit. As for Karen, her decline was swift and undeniable. Without the HOA to lean on, she was just another resident. Except unlike everyone else, she had burned every bridge. Invitations to barbecues stopped arriving. The same neighbors she once controlled now crossed the street to avoid her. And eventually, her house went up for sale. The sign sat in the yard for months, a silent monument to her fall from power. When she finally left, no one waved goodbye. But this story wasn't just about her downfall. It was about what rose in her absence. Final reflection on freedom, resilience, and the valley thriving again.